Bibles again to Mark chapter 5. Mark chapter 5. We're continuing our study through the Gospel of Mark. We've been here since September, and we're finally at chapter 5. If you notice a difference of the sermon title on the screen behind me compared to what you have in front of you on the bulletin note, don't be alarmed, it was a last-minute change. It's the preacher's plight. Sometimes you're just not satisfied with the title, and that was way too long and pithy. And so I decided to kind of continue from last week's sermon title, right? Who then is this? Jesus from the storm. Because it's the question the disciples ask. And then we're going to see that there is someone who answers that question in this morning's message, and they say he's the Son of the Most High God. So that's where that comes from. So follow along with me as I read chapter 5 from verse 1 through 20. It's a long section, the longest narrative, individual story thus far in Mark, 20 verses. And we're going to tackle it all this morning. They came to the other side of the sea, to the country of the Gerasenes. And when Jesus had stepped out of the boat, immediately there met him out of the tombs a man with an unclean spirit. He lived among the tombs, and no one could bind him anymore, not even with a chain. For he had often been bound with shackles and chains, but he wrenched the chains apart, and he broke the shackles in pieces. No one had the strength to subdue him. Night and day among the tombs and on the mountains he was always crying out and cutting himself with stones. And when he saw Jesus from afar, he ran and fell down before him. And crying out with a loud voice, he said, "What have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I adjure you by God, do not torment me." For he was saying to him, "Come out of the man, you unclean spirit." And Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" He replied, "My name is Legion, for we are many." And he begged him earnestly not to send them out of the country. Now a great herd of pigs was feeding there on the hillside, and they begged him, saying, "Send us to the pigs, let us enter them." So he gave them permission. And the unclean spirits came out and entered the pigs, and the herd, numbering about 2,000, rushed down the steep bank into the sea and drowned in the sea. The herdsmen fled and told it in the city and in the country. And people came to see what it was that had happened. And they came to Jesus and saw the demon-possessed man, the one who had the legion, sitting there, clothed and in his right mind. And they were afraid. And those who had seen it described to them what had happened to the demon-possessed man and to the pigs. And they began to beg Jesus to depart from the region. As he was getting into the boat, the man who had been possessed with demons, begged him that he might be with him. And he did not permit him, but said to him, "Go home to your friends and tell them how much the Lord has done for you and how he has had mercy on you." And he went away and began to proclaim in the Decapolis how much Jesus had done for him. And everyone marveled. The world's strongest man competition is a competition that has been going on since 1977, where men who individually rise to the top of regional competitions of strength make it to the one worldwide international competition for the ultimate crown, the ultimate prize of being called the world's strongest man. And in this competition, they're forced to participate in mind-bogglingly difficult feats of strength. They've come up with all sorts of creative events for the men to participate in over the years. Things like the farmer's walk, they call it, where they have to walk a course of about 100 yards with an anvil-like weight in each hand, ranging from 275 to 375 pounds, and who can walk the course the fastest or the longest wins. Things like where they're strapped with a rope, a harness tied to a plane, a small plane, a small train, cars, where they have to pull themselves across the rope, across the course to the finish line, and who can go the farthest and the quickest wins. The log throw, where they have hollowed out logs that they have to literally carry with handles, logs weighing 300-400 pounds. And then just, the regular stuff like deadlifts or squats that you would do in the gym. Just the standard measures of strength. Squatting 900-pound bricks or a 1,000-pound car, deadlifting it. No big deal. And these men are strong. These men are big. In fact, this past year's 2019 champion, a Latvian-born American named Martins Lucis, was 6'3", 331 pounds. That's a beast of a man. The 5-time world champion from the 2000s, Mariusz Pudzianowski, a Polish dude, 6'1", 313 pounds of pure muscle. You should have seen his neck. It was as thick as a bull's. In the 2010s, there was a 4-time champion, an American, Brian Shaw, 6'8", and up to 440 pounds in his prime. That's an ox. And these men were strong as oxes. But I want you to think about something for a minute. With all the creative events that have been concocted by the producers of this event and the hosts every year, there has never been an event where the men had to compete to see who could free themselves from iron shackles around their wrists and iron shackles around their legs. Who could break the chains the fastest? Because it's humanly impossible. Human beings can't break iron. We could be strong, like these strong men, but not strong enough to break metal. That's impossible. That's Herculean strength, who's nothing more than a Greek mythological character. And I want you to think about this for a second. That's the kind of strength that this demoniac had. He was so strong, so powerful, that even iron shackles around his wrists and around his ankles could not restrain him. And I want you to think about this. Jesus was able to free him and subdue him with a word. As strong as this demoniac was, he was no match for Jesus. As powerful the supernatural forces operating within him, they were no match for Jesus and his word. That's the authority and power of Jesus. So powerful, so mighty, that he even managed to transform this man's circumstances from complete and total ruin to complete and total redemption. And we're going to see that here this morning in this story. The characters in this story in whom Jesus encounters, there's different responses to him and to his authority and to his power. Not all are the same. What is the proper response to experiencing Jesus' power? How should we respond to this kind of divine, undeniable, transforming power? And I want you to keep those questions in mind as we go through this story this morning. And so we'll pick it up in verse 1. It says, they came to the other side of the sea, to the country of the Gerasenes. Okay, so this just picks up where we left off last week. Jesus tells his disciples to take him across the Sea of Galilee on the boat to go from the western Jewish side to the eastern Gentile side of the Sea of Galilee. And we know the rest of the story. A great storm arose. Not by chance, not by coincidence, but by God's design to bring them through it. And for Jesus to demonstrate his awesome power, even over nature. And he takes them through it. And it was evening when they left. So now they arrive on the other side. Probably nighttime. To the country of the Gerasenes. What is that? The region of the Gerasenes. Matthew actually calls it, and in some translations, depending on what you have in your hands, the region of the Gerasenes. What's the difference? Not much. Gerasene was a city about 35 miles southeast off the shore, and Gadara was a city about 5 miles southeast off the shore. And so some commentators say, well, it can't be Gerasa because it's too far away. There's no way on this same day when the man comes to rush Jesus when he immediately steps off the boat, he couldn't have gotten 35 miles. So what's the solution? Well, look at the language. He says it's the country of the Gerasenes, the region. It doesn't necessarily have to be exactly there that night. It's the general area. In fact, this whole area, this whole Gentile region, if you look at verse 20, Mark calls it the Decapolis, which just comes from the Greek word deca, meaning 10, right? Decimal, 10. There's 10 towns here, 10 cities. It's the region of 10 towns, the region of 10 cities. And so the evangelists, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, just want you to know that it's in this general area. Jesus has crossed over from Jewish territory to Gentile territory. And immediately, as soon as he steps out the boat, look what it says. And when Jesus had stepped out of the boat, immediately there met him out of the tombs a man with an unclean spirit. He lived among the tombs, and no one could bind him anymore, not even with a chain. For he had often been bound with shackles and chains, but he rent the chains apart, and he broke the shackles in pieces. No one had the strength to subdue him. Night and day among the tombs and on the mountains, he was always crying out and cutting himself with stones. Wow. This is a disturbed man. This is a wretch of a man. Have you seen any situation more hopeless? He is an unclean spirit, verse 2. He's living among the tombs, which means among the dead. That's where they buried people in caves by the hillside. He's living with dead men's bones and bodies. No one could bind him anymore, not even with a chain. He was wrenching them apart, breaking the shackles to pieces. No one had the strength to subdue him. This is a wild man. Night and day among the tombs on the mountains, he was crying out and cutting himself. He's cutting himself, screaming, crying out all the day and all the night long, cutting himself with stones. Can you imagine how gut-wrenching it would be in the area if you're one of these townspeople to hear this man wailing out? How blood-curdling his screams are. Blood-curdlingly terrifying, and yet heart-wrenchingly sad. He's crying out. I wonder what he was crying out. What was he yelling out about? Was he yelling out words in rage, in anger about his situation, not knowing what in the world was going on with him, in his mind, in his body? Was he crying out for help? Feeling all alone? Isolated? Ostracized from society? With no one there to help him? No answer to his screams? And so he's miserable, depressed, cutting himself with stones. And it's just a vicious cycle, day after day after day. I don't know if you could imagine a more pitiful situation in life. And think about this. Yes, he was demon-possessed, but he was a man. He was a human being with a life before all this, with a family, parents, maybe even a wife and children. And all of that was taken away from him now. He had nothing. He was at the lowest point of life imaginable. Lost his family, lost his friends, his profession, his humanity. He had nothing left. Nothing left but his own life, which he's trying to take on his own. Crying out for help day and night. Someone, please, help me. Can anyone help me? Is anyone there? With no answer. No one to help. No one to rescue him. Until Jesus. Look at verse 6. And when he saw Jesus from afar, he ran and fell down before him. And crying out with a loud voice, he said, "What have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I adjure you by God, do not torment me." Now, notice something right away. He's rushing down to see Jesus, coming down the hill when he sees the boat mooring offshore with Jesus and the disciples. It's probably his habit, uncontrollable rage, can't control his body, his mind, what's going on. He's flying down the hill, seeing these figures in the distance, and then suddenly, as he approaches, something in him knows who this is, and he falls flat on his face in worship. It's not the man who knows. It's the demon inside him who knows. They know who Jesus is. That's why they say, "Son of the Most High God, what have you to do with me?" The demons know who he is, and we've been seeing that already in the Gospel of Mark. In the synagogue in Capernaum in chapter 1. In chapter 3, when he's doing all the miracles again by the Sea of Galilee, and he keeps silencing all of them because they're calling him the Son of God. And he falls down before him in terror. Even if it's not real worship. No, demons aren't capable of real worship, we know that. But out of reverence, out of respect for who he knows is standing in front of him, the sovereign God, his creator. And he falls flat on his face, begging Jesus. He says, "I adjure you by God." It can be translated, "Swear to God, do not torment me." He's trying to make him take an oath to do something, anything he can. Why? Because he knows what his end is. In Luke's parallel account, in Luke chapter 8, he actually says, "Do not cast me into the abyss." The abyss, the Yabusas. What's the abyss? The pit. The bottomless pit of Revelation chapter 20, 1-3. That's reserved for Satan and his demons. When Jesus will come back, when he establishes his millennial kingdom and reign on earth, and he'll cast and bind Satan into the abyss, it says, into the pit. It's that pit. And that's why he's scared of Jesus, the Son of God, because he knows what his mission is. He knows who he is, and he knows what he's capable of. And isn't it amazing that they know who he is still? This irony we've been seeing all along. But the crowds don't. The disciples don't. The 12 don't. Nobody with Jesus. And especially after they just seen what he did on the sea in calming the storm, remember? Who then is this that even the wind and sea obey him? And they trembled in fear. They shook in fear. And now the demons are saying, "I'll tell you who this is." The disciples are there listening to this whole conversation. "This is the Son of the Most High God." It's almost as if they're saying, how do you not see this by now? Did you forget what he just did an hour ago on the sea? But the demons know. And so at this point, I think it's important for us to consider the reality that intellectual assent, knowledge of Jesus, of his person, and of his work is not enough. It's not enough to know who he is and what he's done. You have to believe in him. You have to trust in him completely for your salvation. You have to follow him. That's why the demons aren't saved. They could never be saved anyways. They're irredeemable. That we know. And look at verses 11 to 13. Actually, we'll pick it up in 8. He's crying out loud with a loud voice. He said, "What have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I adjure you by God, do not torment me." For he was saying to him, "Come out of the man, you unclean spirit." And Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" He replied, "My name is Legion, for we are many." And it's interesting to note there that it's not one demon this time that Jesus is up against. Did you see the switch in the language there in verse 9 from the singular to the plural? He says this is a legion. What is legion? Well, a legion was a Roman cohort. It was a military term that they used to define a specific number of soldiers. And in this case, a Roman legion was up to 6,000 men and 200 horsemen. So what is he saying? Are you telling me there's 6,000 demons in this man? Not necessarily. There could be. But the point is, they're saying, for we are many. My name is Legion, for we are many. The point is, there's a lot of us here. And there's a lot of us here that are trembling, bowing before you, asking you not to cast us away into the abyss. Again, that just speaks to the authority and the power of Jesus. Thousands of demons maybe are no match for him in his word. And they asked to be sent to a herd of pigs. 2,000 pigs. Now, why would they ask to be sent to pigs? I don't know. I don't think anyone can say definitively, other than the fact that surveying the area as this is all going on, these were probably the only other physical beings that they could possibly possess. So they're looking around. If we're out of this man, don't send us into the abyss. Anything but the abyss, send us into the pigs. And Jesus permits it. He lets them go into the pigs. And immediately the pigs start acting wildly, run and plunge off a cliff to their death. Now, before any animal lovers in here try to give me or Jesus a hard time here, you need to understand something. Well, first of all, nobody's more upset about this than me. That is a waste of a lot of good bacon for life. That's 2,000 pigs. GMO-free, Palestinian born and raised. Doesn't get any better than that. And they're gone. It's tragic. It's tragic. I know pigs are kind of immortalized in some of our minds, right? Because they've been depicted in certain cartoon characters and children's stories. Oh, Little Miss Piggy, so cute. Babe the pig, the three little pigs, and whatever that pig's name is in Charlotte's Web. I get that, Wilbert. But there's a greater point here. Are you saying Jesus doesn't care about animals? Of course he does. And in Matthew says he cares even for the birds of the sky and the flowers of the fields. But in that same comparison, he's saying he cares more about people than he does animals, about human beings. Because human beings have souls. Because human beings can be redeemed and are in need of redemption. And it's for this very reason he came down to earth to accomplish their redemption. And that's the point that Mark's making here, and the other evangelists. That even if it costs 2,000 pigs' lives to deliver this one demon-possessed man, that is nothing more than collateral damage. You cannot compare the value of an animal with no soul, with no self-consciousness, to a human being for whom Christ spilled his blood. What about the people? They've now seen this. So the demons respond. It's not enough. Look at verses 14 to 17. The herdsmen fled and told it in the city and in the country. And people came to see what it was that had happened. And they came to Jesus and saw the demon-possessed man, the one who had the legion, sitting there, clothed and in his right mind, and they were afraid. And those who had seen it described to them what had happened to the demon-possessed man and to the pigs, and they began to beg Jesus to depart from their region. Notice what is going on here. Imagine the sheer surprise. Everyone in the region, the word spreads in the town. They rush to see what happened. And they come here, and they see this man who's been terrorizing their town. It says, sitting down, which is the language of discipleship, at Jesus' feet, like the disciples, fully clothed, because he was running around naked, cutting himself, and in his right mind, calm, peaceful, human. And how do they respond initially? It says, they were afraid. Like the disciples were afraid on the sea. And just like on the Sea of Galilee, the disciples' fear was initially of the storm, of the wind, and of the waves, and then it moves to being afraid of the one who had the power over the wind and the waves. And in the same way here, the people who were afraid of this demon-possessed man are now afraid of the man who freed him of the legion of demons. This is terrifying power. There's no other way to put it. There's no other way around it. And they're afraid. But after they have a moment to process what's just happened here, what is their final response? Notice the contrast. The demons beg Jesus not to send them out of the region, and the people beg Jesus to leave the region. They beg him to leave. They don't want anything to do with him. Why? Why don't they want anything to do with him? Is it simply because he's ruining their local economy, destroying 2,000 pigs, which would be the equivalent of value today with inflation into the millions of dollars? 2 to 3 million? Is that why? Maybe. But I don't think that's the only reason why. I think they're more afraid of him because of the power that he yielded. And the fact that they know they have no control over him. This is not a man they can control. In fact, they would rather be with the demonized man and have the evil forces operating inside of him, terrorizing their neighborhoods, apparently, than be with Jesus. That was more comfortable to them. They felt a greater level of control of that situation than with a man who has the power to free such a demon-possessed man, Jesus. We don't know who this is. We don't understand his power. We have no control over him. Could you please just leave our town? That would make us feel better. And they respond this way also, because there's a reality here that I don't want any of us to miss, is that when you come face to face with Jesus and with this kind of authority and power, you can never be the same. One way or another, your life is changing, whether you like it or not. And if you walk away, it's the greater judgment knowing you've had this revelation, this supernatural revelation of Jesus, and you had every opportunity to believe, but you didn't. But if you do believe, and you do want to be with him and follow him, he flips your world upside down. And they didn't want that. They loved their life as it was. It was comfortable. They loved their way of life, the way things were around there. They didn't want this kind of change. So it's better for you to go, sir. Could you please just leave our area? I'm sure they did it politely. Wonderful. You see, it's possible to see and experience the supernatural manifestation of God in Jesus and still not believe. I know a lot of people, especially unbelievers. Look, this is a Gentile region. People who don't know God, don't know anything about God in that day and age. I've talked to a lot of people today. I'm sure you have. Oh, if only I could just see a miracle. If only I could just experience it. If only Jesus would just appear to me if he's real. Then I would believe. Really. This is yet another cold shower on that kind of religious pipe dream. It's not true. No, you wouldn't. Just continue living the life that you want to live and doing what you want to do, just like they did. You don't want that transformation that he's bringing. And you and I have experienced and seen a lot of this too, haven't we? In another way. When you were saved, and when God first saved you, and you believed, and you started following him for days, for weeks and months and years, getting to know him more and following after him more, and your family and friends seeing this complete 180-degree transformation in your life, in your thinking, in your views, in your beliefs, in your demeanor, in your disposition, in your speech, and everything, and they saw this. And you shared it with them, and you told them time and time again, and yet they still walk away. And they don't want anything to do with it. Just like these village people. So the people's response isn't enough. They don't respond well, rightly. But what about the man? Look at verses 19 to 20. Or 18 to 20. As he was getting into the boat, the man who had been possessed with demons begged him that he might be with him. And he did not permit him, but said to him, "Go home to your friends and tell them how much the Lord has done for you and how he has had mercy on you." And he went away and began to proclaim in the Decapolis how much Jesus had done for him. And everyone marveled. The demons begged Jesus not to send them away, and Jesus granted their request. The people begged Jesus to go away, and he grants their request. The man begs to be with Jesus, and yet he doesn't grant his request. Why wouldn't he grant his request? This is what every believer wants. This is what true disciples do everywhere. They want to be with Jesus. They want to follow him. He wants to join his band of 12 on the boat. It's a good desire. So why didn't Jesus let him follow him? Ooh, Jesus said, no, it's not that I don't have room for you on the boat. It's full. It's not that. I mean, if anything, I could easily toss Judas overboard anyways and put him out of his misery. And you could replace him as the 12th. No, that wasn't it. It's not because he was a Gentile and it would have been highly frowned upon and questionable for Jesus to have a Gentile disciple in his band of Jewish 12, knowing that he was first and foremost on a mission to the Jews to save them, to redeem them, and then to graft in and extend that salvation to the Gentiles. Is that why? No, I don't think that's why either. Then why? Well, Jesus answers that question. He says in verse 19, you can't come with me. Not because I don't want you to come with me. And it's a good thing that you want to come with me. It speaks to the genuineness of your faith. But you can't come with me because I have something more special for you. I have a greater purpose for you. Here, in the Decapolis, this Gentile region, these 10 towns, you need to go and tell them about me. You need to go and tell them about the mercy that the Lord has shown you. That's your mission. That's your purpose. That's why Jesus wants them to stay. And you say, well, how do you know this man had real faith? Isn't it a bit of a stretch? Isn't it a bit of a speculation to say that this man was saved? Well, there's language of discipleship all over here. Even when the village people first come to see him and they see him sitting, which is how the disciples are always described, sitting at Jesus' feet. And then here, begging, as the boat's ready to go offshore, begging to follow him, to be with him. That's what a disciple does. And even more than that, I don't know if you caught this. How do you know he believes? Well, in order to believe, you have to believe the right thing about Jesus and who he is and what he's done. Did you see what Jesus says to them in verse 19? He says, go home, tell your friends, tell your family, tell the cities, tell everyone how much the Lord has done for you. And what does the man do? In verse 20, he goes home, tells his friends, tells his family, tells the city and all the cities in the Decapolis how much, what does it say? How much Jesus has done for him. He's equating the Lord with Jesus, of course, which is the right belief about Jesus. And everyone marveled. And everyone marveled. Look, I don't know whether everyone in that region, in the 10 cities in the Decapolis, believed or not. We're not told that. In fact, more than anything, I'd have reason to believe that they're not yet. They're just amazed, and that's not Mark's purview here. We know marveling and being amazed isn't enough. You need to believe, you need to follow. But that doesn't change how spectacular of a transformation this is. Can you imagine what his homecoming was like after all of this? So Jesus tells him to go home to your friends, to your family, and tell them. What did he say to them? How would they have reacted? After he'd been gone for days, weeks, months, who knows how long, years? He'd lost everything. This man was a beast like what happened with Nebuchadnezzar, reduced from humanity to beastliness. And then he runs back home. You can just picture this in your mind. Walking through the street of his town. Maybe it's his parents or his wife, his children see him. They look up in shock and disbelief. Looking exactly as he looked before. As a man, in his normal state of mind. His wits about him. An inexplicable joy written all over his face. And he rushes to tell them, guys, you're not going to believe what happened to me. I don't know what happened to me. I was lost. I was irredeemable. I couldn't control my thoughts, my actions, my behavior. Something came across me. I was angry at life. I was angry at God. I was angry at you. I hated everyone. I just wanted to die. And so I even cut myself. And then suddenly one day, this boat comes ashore, and this man comes ashore, and I ran up to meet him. And my life was never the same. I'm here now. I'm back. It's me. And he freed me from the prison I was trapped in, from the possession that dominated me. And if he can free me from forces that powerful, if he has control over demons, he has control over life and death. And he must be God, because only God can do that. And so not only did he save me physically and deliver me physically, but he saved me eternally. And I'm here to tell you about him, and to tell everyone I can about him and about what he's done for me. There's something else that's flowing through this text that we haven't talked about yet. Something that I don't want any of us to miss, because it's important. Jesus, for the first time in Mark's gospel, is preaching to and doing a miracle in front of Gentiles. Up until now, he's been with his people, the Jews. And now he purposes to go across the Sea of Galilee to the Gentiles, to the unclean, the filthy, the subhuman in the eyes of the Jews. And that language is all over this text, right? He's in the country of the Gerasenes. That's Gentile territory, unclean. He encounters a Gentile man, an unclean man, who's doubly unclean because he's in tombs touching dead men's bodies, and according to the Levitical law, you touch a dead person's body, you were unclean for at least a week. And then you have herds of pigs, unclean, grotesque, filthy, delicious animals, but filthy. It doesn't get more unclean than that in the eyes of the Jews. And so we see this from throughout this story, from beginning to end, this uncleanness, this focus on this subhuman group of people, whom to the Jews are irredeemable. And I bet even in the disciples' minds, after all this, after the supernatural manifestation of Jesus' power on the sea, and now also seeing him free this man who was captivated by a legion of demons. And I'm sure they're scared and terrified, but in their humanity, in the back of their minds, they're probably like, them? You're preaching to them? You came to rescue them? They're a little above animals in their mind. Yes, he came to them. And so this is the beginning in Mark's gospel of the manifestation of what was always promised in the Old Testament. The mystery that they call it, the secret of the kingdom of God coming down to the nations, to the Gentiles, to the unclean, to the filthy, the irredeemable in the eyes of the Jews. It was always meant for them. They are included in God's kingdom plan. And it's come to them here. The gospel of God, the kingdom of God in the form of its king. No one's irredeemable in the eyes of God. No one's too great, too filthy, too disgusting of a sinner for Christ's blood to wash clean. And whom Christ's blood washes clean can never be called unclean. That's what it says elsewhere. What God has called clean, you can't call unclean, including the Gentiles. This is God's plan of salvation and redemption all along. And look, if you feel like you're ever in a situation, maybe now, hopeless, beyond the grace of God and the power of God, the God who came down and freed this man from a host, a legion of demons, is the same God who can come down from heaven and free you and rescue you from whatever you think you're going through in life. There's no greater power, no greater force, no greater trial, a tribulation, whatever, that he can't overcome. You just have to believe and have faith. Bow with me in a word of prayer. Father, what can we say in the face of such awesome, undeniable power and authority and even mercy on full display? That you came to rescue and to ransom even the worst of sinners, those outcast by society, shunned, in the lowest of the low, unclean, whom others would regard irredeemable. You came to purchase even their forgiveness. You came to free them and deliver them from their pain, from their suffering, from their brokenness in life, but even more than anything, from their slavery to sin and death. And you've done the same for us, for all of us who believe and who love you and follow you. And we pray for anyone who doesn't, who hasn't yet trusted in Jesus fully for their salvation and for their forgiveness of sin, that they would, that you'd grant it to them, and they would follow after him. And we'll give you all the praise and glory in Jesus' matchless name. Amen.
Amen. Stand with me.